Hi everyone, Dr. Katie Larson here and my lucky scarf, and today's video is brought to you by tenacity. Today's video is brought to you by tenacity because I've started this live video maybe 6 times and each time something has happened or has gone wrong. So thank you for your patience. Finally, we're here today to talk about two seemingly identical words. At least people use them identically, but they're very distinct, which is meaning and purpose. So what we'll talk about in today's video is the difference between these two important concepts, their origin and their use in your life. And then we'll also talk about why this can be especially difficult to articulate, especially for highly sensitive people. So let's talk first about the origin of both meaning and purpose. Both of these, in my opinion, begin on the vertical dimension. So we'll speak once more about what the vertical dimension is by comparing it first to the horizontal dimension. In the horizontal dimension, this is the life dimension that we live our day-to-day on. It's like where you would describe what you do, what you actually have done during the day, everything that's measurable, anything that you can actually describe very easily because it's usually in the physical realm. The horizontal dimension, I would just assume about 80 to 90% of us live entirely on that for the majority of our lives. And we don't necessarily try to tap into something that I call the vertical dimension. So to compare it against the horizontal dimension, if the horizontal is the day-to-day finite time that we have on this earth, the vertical dimension is when we're tapping into something that feels more infinite. It feels more grandiose, or like we are almost like peeking into another dimension, another realm, something more real than real, something eternal, and that we can find little pockets of, but it's almost impossible to live there full time. In fact, we would probably fry our brains if we really attempted to live in the vertical dimension all the time. But the vertical dimension is where we find meaning and purpose. And so I want to just distinguish between the north and the south, because it's in the north that we find meaning. It's in the south that we find purpose. So let's talk about meaning first, because meaning is where we're getting all of our belief systems, the way we make sense of the world, the structure of who and what the mystery is to us. Some of us call the mystery God, others the universe, the big picture, the sacred, the divine. But there's a mysterious element in the north of the vertical dimension that represents all that is. I like to call it spirit, because it's spirit that permeates everything. And sometimes we pick up on this. And by understanding that spirit and what we describe it as and how our relationship with it evolves, that's how we make meaning. Because we're trying to make sense of what that mystery is. And so there's usually a framework that I like to describe as a construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction framework for how you make meaning of the mystery. And the first phase is construction. This is the foundational belief system that you were given at birth. It could be a family religion. It could be no religion. It could be something that has a capital letter, like Catholicism, which is what I was given. Or it could be just some beliefs that were kind of whipped together and your parents talked about off and on throughout your life. But whatever you were given laid the foundation for who you were in your young childhood and in your young adulthood. But at some point, and this is vital for everybody for the process of individuation and in the process of our growth journeys, you had a deconstruction phase of what you were given. You took what you were foundationally meant to believe in and you destroyed it. And for many of us, this can be our most disorienting experience of our young life, because often it turns believers into non-believers, or non-believers into believers. It flips us completely on our head, and we often question everything. And you're meant to. It's the rebellious act of trying to find out who you are in the world by questioning the assumptions and the beliefs that you were handed. I reckon this to being handed a house, and then in the deconstruction phase, taking apart everything in the house. Soon, you get to the reconstruction phase. And this is like akin to keeping the furniture, but getting rid of the carpets, right? So oftentimes in the reconstruction phase, we begin to put back the pieces of our belief system. Sometimes it's things that we actually were raised with. Like maybe if you were raised Christian, you kind of keep that Lord's Prayer in your back pocket and say it every once in a while when you get stressed out. Or maybe you were raised atheist and you keep the skepticism, the healthy skepticism of being atheist, but you also take on some spiritual practices that just feel really good to you, like yoga or meditation. But the reconstruction phase is the longest phase of our lives. It's when we're actually trying to make sense of what we truly believe in and what experiences in our life maybe contradicted what we were given, and then how do we make amends with that? And that's an exciting experience for everybody, especially a highly sensitive person, because we tend to want direct experience of the spiritual nature, more so than someone who's not as sensitive. But when you're reconstructing your faith, you're kind of rebuilding and putting back little pieces and hanging new furniture in your walls and seeing how they fit. And most of us, if you have a healthy spiritual belief, we hold on to these things quite loosely because we know how easily you can have a deconstruction phase all over again. If you find you're somebody who wants to grab on tightly to something else in the reconstruction phase, you might be actually setting yourself up for new meaning making in a few years when something contradicts the other thing that you grabbed on so tightly to after your deconstruction phase. But this meaning of how you're making sense of the mystery of the universe, of God, of the divine, the best part about it is it's different for every single person. And even if you do subscribe to a certain faith or certain belief system, chances are that you and another person in that faith are going to have profoundly different experiences and profoundly different belief systems. So the way that you're going to make meaning about the world is going to be completely personal and unique. So I'll just give a personal example. I was born Catholic, and I almost got kicked out of Catholic school for questioning things because I'm also a questioner by nature. And it was probably in my early teenage years that I began my deconstruction phase of tearing down all of the things that I was given as a Catholic. I think a lot of us Catholics call this, I'm a recovering Catholic, because during our deconstruction phase, we begin to question everything. Personally, I went down the path of science. I became a scientist and a science teacher. And so a lot of the things that I felt were more important than a spiritual way of describing the world became more absolute in a scientific perspective. And I based a whole career on this, and I kind of grabbed more tightly onto science, not necessarily onto an atheistic view, but onto a materialistic view towards the very early adulthood of my life. But then I started experiencing things that were unexplainable for science. I started having a lot of psychic and clairvoyant phenomenon, seeing ghosts, seeing and feeling things that weren't there. I also had past life memories reemerge and have past life regressions and psychedelic and other drug experiences that made me question reality and question my own understanding of consciousness. And it was then that I was left with these questioning of assumptions and questioning of belief systems that I began the reconstruction phase. Some things I wanted to make my foundation. I strongly believe in reincarnation, and I strongly believe that reality is not what it seems, just based on my own personal experience. So those would be like the new foundations of my house. Things that I'm not necessarily willing to let go of easily, but if in light of new information, I'll probably let go of it because I don't want to have a house that's built on faulty foundations. But I also have some things that I brought back from Catholicism. I am one of those weirdos that still says the Lord's Prayer when I'm stressed out. I also really love mystic Christianity, the explanation for Christ consciousness and trying to understand what it is when we are trying to find the kingdom within. I'm an endless seeker, and because I was given Christianity, I can go back into the Christian books and understand it from a different perspective because of the experiences I've had. And so I've also been in lots of places in the world, and I've been strongly pulled into other religions with capital letters like Hinduism and Buddhism. And I even have memories of past lives as being a Muslim. And so having all of these weird experiences and memories and insights has allowed me to have a reconstructed meaning-making system that brings meaning from all different parts of myself and from the mystery that is. So the meaning is something where, again, we don't really know what's true, but you're always trying to capture versions of truth. And every type of meaning making is usually trying to get to some form of truth. There's also nihilistic ways of making meaning, which is nothing matters. Meaning is meaningless. And these things also influence the way we find purpose. So meaning lives in the North. The North is the way we make sense of the mystery, all that is, the sacred, the divine, the energy that permeates the fabric of reality. How do you make sense of that? Why are we here? What is this place? That is how I describe meaning. The South brings us into purpose, because the South brings us into what I call our soul, or our essence, or our psyche. It's the actual part of us who is very unique and is that spark of the great mystery, but as a sovereign, autonomous being, you. And that sovereign, autonomous being, we have unique gifts that we were born with. We have skills that we've learned. And we have insights into the way that we're meant to be operating in the world. And those operational callings or summonings or beckonings, those are our purpose. And they're plural, because we don't just have one purpose. We might have an umbrella that is our umbrella purpose. For me, it's actually connection and education is my umbrella purpose. But underneath that umbrella, I have thousands of smaller purposes that change depending on the day and depending on my circumstance, as is it for you. So purpose, it originates in the south of the vertical dimension, because it's when you get access to that strange, indescribable yearning, or that weird cluster of gifts that only you have, especially only you amongst your peers. Maybe you're really good at listening. Maybe you're really creative, or you were born with a natural talent for sports or for art. And the purpose that you have is going to be around these gifts, or around the skills. For example, I have a skill where I understand science, but I have a gift where I'm very intuitive. So making amends with these is my purpose. And the way that I do it is going to show up differently each time. So when we're talking about our purpose, this can be directly influenced by the way we make meaning. Because again, if you're making meaning, let's say you're a nihilist and you say nothing matters, then your purpose isn't going to be anchored into something that is your belief system. If you have a very strong belief system, like perhaps you're a strong believer in Judaism, then you're anchored into a way that you understand the world, and your purpose is going to be likely more aligned to the values and the morals of the Jewish faith. If you're like me and you don't have a capital letter for what you believe in, but you kind of have a mix and match of things, you're working with that reconstructed house, where some days you're working on the foundation. Like for me, I wonder okay, I strongly believe that I was born for a reason, and that everything in my life has probably been pre-chosen by me in a soul's perspective. So why did I choose this exact moment to be alive, right now? That's based on my belief system. If suddenly my belief system changes, then the way that I'm going to find my purpose is going to change as well. Something I think is really important for us to understand about purpose is that it doesn't need to be tied to a career. And I think that's the number one mistake my clients make, and even sometimes I make it when I'm like, oh, I can't articulate my job, I can't articulate what I'm meant to be doing in my job, and my job, and my job, and here my child in the corner like crying because she wants mommy's attention, and I'm like, leave me alone, I got my job to do. Our purpose often is intertwined with just being in the world, not even doing, but just being in the world. I had a really exciting phone call from a former student last week, and this former student just found me on Facebook and started writing me a message saying, I'm sorry, but I was called to call you. I don't know why. And the conversation that we had, it just evolved into the perfect conversation that both of us needed at that exact moment. He needed validation that he was on the right path, and I needed validation that I was on the right path. And through our conversation, it came. And it was really funny because prior to talking to him, I was questioning my purpose. Am I on the right track? Should I be doing what I was doing 5-10 years ago? Should I go back into teaching? Should I go back into science? But a strong pull towards something new, something that I haven't done yet before, towards being courageous, to actually showing and expressing this unique set of gifts that I have to the world, and being unabashedly unashamed of who I am. That was my new purpose. And having that call with him, the meaning I made was I needed someone to validate that I was on the right track, going in that direction of that new purpose. Before I mentioned, sometimes it's just who you are in the world. Sometimes being the patient, clear, level-headed, even emotioned person in a scenario where people are getting outraged easily and choosing sides unnecessarily, just you having a calmer demeanor is your purpose. Sometimes taking care of a loved one, an elderly parent, a child, a partner, that's your purpose. And it's not your lifelong purpose, but it is in that moment. And so allowing ourselves a little bit of slack when it comes to finding our purpose is something I help my clients with, because often we want to tie our purpose into our job every time. And that's okay, but you also might not realize that your purpose in your job one day is going to look different than your purpose another day. One day, you might be there because you need to help somebody who's having a really hard time. Another time, you might be there because you need to help your client understand how to get more followers on Facebook. Nobody really understands each day what their purpose is going to look like until later, when we can reflect on how we feel and how aligned it was with the way we make meaning. Now, the last thing I want to share about meaning and purpose having a relationship is that once you tap into meaning, your purpose comes a lot more clearly. Once you can sit down, and I really recommend doing this with a journal or artwork or something, maybe you just want to move and kind of feel into the way you're making sense of the world. But once you tap into the way you're making meaning of the mystery, the divine, the sacred, God, the universe, suddenly you can see yourself through the lens of that. So if you make meaning that we actually are important and significant as individuals, then your individual gifts suddenly carry more weight with them. They suddenly become more clear. when you can see yourself compared to the other people that you know. I think I'm one of the only people that I'm aware of in my immediate upbringing that's clairvoyant and that is comfortable expressing myself and the weird nitty-gritty details of my weirdness. But the more I am courageous about that side of me, my purpose to find the others becomes more apparent, and to find tribes of us to band together and to go forward into the world living more purposely, it becomes apparent. And so finding the relationship between meaning and purpose is imperative, no matter what your meaning is. And the last thing I want to mention about how highly sensitive people engage with this process is that we find it really difficult to articulate the immensity of what I just described. When I leave this call today, I'm going to walk away feeling like, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that. Like, I never can quite articulate what I mean by the meaning of things, or like the universe, I should have said this. And that's because as highly sensitive people, we're feeling the world and our experiences and our emotions and our thoughts in it very strongly and very deeply and almost multidimensionally in themselves. We live in Technicolor. And to try to explain Technicolor to someone who's still on black and white, or someone who has vocabulary of black and white, it can be very difficult. And so as we become more fully engaged as highly sensitive people in embracing our own skill sets and our own abilities and gifts, our vocabulary increases so that we can actually articulate ourselves more accurately. But we will always fall short. And I think it's that constant falling short that keeps so many of us highly sensitives motivated or depressed. I know for me, I get really depressed when I feel like I can't articulate how it is I'm truly feeling. And even as I'm saying this now, I'm like, I'm still not articulating it well. I've tried writing, I've tried art, I've tried speaking. No matter what I do, I always am falling short of this grandiose idea, but I will never stop trying. Told you this was brought to you by tenacity. But it's also when I fall so short that I get the most upset with myself and I feel like I'm not living my purpose. So if you resonate with that, I am someone to help you reconcile how you are unable to fully articulate your true expression in the world. There are ways to improve it, and there are ways to accept when you are not going to improve it. And these are things that I help my clients with. So thank you for joining me today when we're talking about meaning and purpose, the difference between the two, where they originate. Meaning is in the north of the vertical dimension, the eternal realm that is always around us, that we can only tap into but never fully live in. And purpose is in the south of the vertical dimension, which is all we are, our soul, our essence. Again, we tap into it, but we're always living on this boring horizontal dimension, and so we're never really fully living from who we are authentically 100% of the time. And that's okay. If you've resonated with this, I'm going to put a link in my comments for Meaning Quest, which is my attempt to articulate and express a way that we can make meaning of both crazy 2020 and life itself. If you're interested, give it a look and reach out if you have any questions. Thanks for joining me today. Me and the Scarf. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.